to see lots of friends in the audience. Thanks for coming out, as Elizabeth said. I'm not going to be very controversial this evening. I'm more going to seduce you, I hope, with wonderful images. Well, I think they're wonderful. You can whinge about them afterwards if you don't like them or ask me about them. But the idea is to show the breadth of Afghan culture as I know it, as a non-Afghan who's been in the country for decades, but I'm well aware that some of you, many of you in the audience, will know a lot more about the backstories than I do, even though I've tried to learn what I can. So forgive me and get back to me if I misspeak in any way. But I'll try and provide a glimpse of the richness of Afghan built heritage and make a case for its relevance at a time when many communities in the country feel isolated through no fault of their own. And those words are carefully chosen. Before this, however, I'd like to explain my perspective on the situation in the country today, shaped by decades of experience of supporting Afghans to address the challenges they face, both in cultural and other realms. Now more than ever, such initiatives on the ground tend to come under scrutiny, perhaps for understandable reasons. But given the potential for such collaboration, I make no apology for supporting those committed Afghans who remain in the country to safeguard their heritage, even if this results, as some armchair pundits and certain Afghans now in the diaspora claim, is being portrayed as a useful idiot of what's going on the ground. The second caveat, by way of introduction, in my view, generalized and at times sensationalized portrayals of Afghanistan's cultural heritage as being somehow endangered, risks ignoring just how important it remains for ordinary citizens who, as I shall explain, are often the actual custodians of sites, crafts, practices, and traditions. From village elders to school teachers, civil servants to market traders, masons to daily laborers, every citizen has some understanding of their culture, even if this might not always be easily recognized by outsiders. Afghans' ability to value and enhance their cultural lives has throughout history been challenged, lest we forget. The current restrictions, though inexcusable and contrary to the views of many Afghans, are far from unique, but quiet persistence inevitably trumps intolerance and prejudice. And I'd like to expand on that and perhaps in the discussion hear your views on that. Afghans are pushing back, big time. Far from questioning the need to champion freedom of cultural practice in the country, it's my conviction that Afghans themselves will, over time, find ways to assert themselves, and their lives will be all the richer for it. Next slide, please. I'm confining my presentation this evening to monuments. There is, of course, a wide range of cultural heritage and practice, collections, music, dance, literature, folklore, that also deserves attention. And it's lovely to have John and Veronica here in terms of kind of my teachers to some extent on whatever little I know about Afghan music. Next, please. I took this photograph just after the looting and destruction of the National Museum in Kabul by Mujahideen fighters in '93, and include the image as a reminder of historical facts, which have since been distorted by some for political ends, particularly up to 2021. To recount the full story would take all evening. Some of you may have heard my views on this before, so I'll stick to built heritage. I've chosen a number of projects that, to my mind, illustrate both the challenges and opportunities of conservation, and shall try to draw out the key issues that emerge and identify our missteps. Between each case study, I'll identify other sites with similar potential. Could I have the next slide, please? That also need attention. They're not in chronological order, so be prepared for some time traveling. Many of you will recognize this. It's in the Victoria and Albert Museum, Mughal miniature of Bara Babur. Oh, it's not, it's actually Bara Wafa, which is in Nangarhar, but it's Babur laying out a garden. It's the largest and quite the most complicated conservation project that I've worked on, as Elizabeth said, with the Aga Khan Trust for Culture. But it's also one of the most rewarding. Had we known at the start of the work in 2003 how challenging the task was, we may well have had second thoughts. Next slide, please. As you'll see from this image, which I took in '94, the garden was laid waste during interfactional fighting, and as a result, the whole site was littered with unexploded ordnance. Next slide, please. Families had been displaced from the surrounding neighborhoods, so it was important to balance the investment in the garden itself with measures to encourage resettlement, which paid off as many returnees were employed on site. Next slide, please. The reconstruction of the earthen walls, however, which you see here, was undertaken by a band of men from Wardak province who had evidently worked on parsa. This technique is known as parsa, it's rammed earth, all their lives, and seemed to regard this as just simply another job. They were totally unfazed by this mammoth, I think it's 3 kilometers of walling. The reason I raise this is, lest we forget that such traditions may not need rescuing, in inverted commas, if we make the effort to look for them. I'm very uncomfortable with this sometimes paternalistic, sometimes inaccurate and downright misrepresentation of the fact that, we need to go and help the Afghans to rescue their crafts, their culture, their traditions, their history. It's much more complicated than that. We have very limited agency in that, and Afghans, in many cases, you provide a bit of money and a bit of space, they come out of the woodwork and extremely skilled people, and that I've learned enormously from. Next slide, please. Laid out by Babur in the early 16th century, the garden had fallen into disrepair. This is a photograph from the 1870s by John Burke, just to show how run down it was, but also how the site has always captured people. John Burke was stationed there in the Second Anglo-Afghan War, so in a complicated political time. One early challenge we faced in the garden was to identify what to restore, the original Mughal features and layout or subsequent enhancement, because the building had been added on to, next slide please, but in the 19th century. In the end, the work of archaeologists strengthened our case for a reinstallment of this, the central water channel, that was a key element of Babur's design. We found it about several meters beneath the surface. Despite this, the decision to reconstruct raised some eyebrows amongst Mughal groupies in this country and elsewhere at the time. And there are a lot of Mughal groupies out there, I can tell you. Next, please. We drew on Babur's highly entertaining memoir, the Baburnama, when replanting the orchards on re-level terraces, sourcing flowering cherries, almonds, apples, quinces, and many others that he so loved. We had an extraordinary horticulturalist, actually from Wardak, who went on a motorcycle, very experienced man, to villages and just tagged trees like 2 or 3 years beforehand and said, I want that cherry, that quince, that pear. And then slowly we built up this and it's quite a transformation. I'll show you later. Next slide, please. From the day it reopened, the gates to the garden were never really closed, and the recollections and observations of visiting Afghans proved to be invaluable. There were a lot of very, very well-informed people who remembered the 60s and the 50s and wonderful reminiscences. Babur was popular with families from Kabul and beyond. After tortuous negotiations, next slide please, revenue raised from visitors and events reverts to a trust, the Babur Trust, which we set up, that's responsible for upkeep. And this is the kind of event that we'd organize. This is a musical evening in what's called the Caravanserai, which is a rebuilt Mughal-era building in the bottom of the garden. Next slide, please. I've lost count of how many million Afghans have visited the garden since it formally reopened. Next slide, please. The sooner families are again allowed to fully enjoy Baga Babur, and I say that with some emphasis, the better. And a number of friends are campaigning to make sure that public space is again open to women and families. We had an arrangement in 2008 when we opened the garden that there was a families only day. So the young sort of luchak, the lads from the local neighborhood wouldn't come and terrorize everybody. Next slide, please. The result of the work at Baga Babur, in my view, strengthens the case for rehabilitation of other public gardens, such as that at the Mausoleum of Garashad. This was taken last week in Herat, or next slide, please, in Istalef, Takht Istalef, among other sites. This is an extraordinary, again, this was laid out by Babur. It's mentioned in his memoirs. Nobody knows quite how old these Panchachinar trees are, these plane trees are. The idea is to provide secure green space, particularly for families. We've applied to donors for funding for both of these sites and other sites, but so far to no avail. Next slide, please. That's not a hard luck story. It just goes with the game. The next project I'd like to outline is in Herat, where between 2013 and 16, we worked on conserving a pair of 15th century mausoleum who are located. There are 2 little blips just at the top of that red circle. This is basically well, Charlie will correct me if I'm wrong, but the sort of post-medieval layout of downtown Herat, the square city, which is often portrayed as older than time. It's not. The real old city is at the top there. Take this chair as well. Located in a large cemetery in an area known as Kuhandej, which is the site of the earlier settlement. I've circled Kuhandej more or less, so you can see the sort of the shape of the walls. The bottom is the Qali Ikhtiyaruddin, the citadel, which many of you will be familiar with. Next slide, please. What I'm going to focus on are these two mausolea. There's one there, there's one here, one older than the other, as far as we know. That we were in a precarious state when we undertook initial surveys. Aside from their architectural significance, the buildings play a very important role in social and religious life of the residents of the neighborhood. Next slide, please. This meant that we had to ensure continued access while undertaking some major structural repairs without endangering public safety or modesty, dare I say. Next, please. As is often the case with conservation projects, the further we got into the project, the more work we found to be necessary. The whole side, you can see the new brickwork here, and that Iwan there, that whole half dome had to be rebuilt. So it's a very tricky thing with these buildings because you open things up and you find more and more and more. At Shahzad Abdullah, which is this one, Shahzad Abdullah, we had to completely rebuild the unstable parts of the masonry that had been damaged. This had been at the front line between government and opposition forces in the 1980s, so it really got a hammering. Next slide, please. It was during this fighting that much of the glazed tile work on the exterior was destroyed, although we were able to piece together fragments found in the rubble. And this was part of picking up fragments inside the building, outside the building, and piecing them together. Very painstaking process, all done by very skilled Afghan craftsmen. To restore what is perhaps, in my view, some of the finest Timurid tile work to survive in situ in the country. As is so often the case, there are many exquisite tiles from Herat in Western museums, including the British Museum and the V&A, that few Afghans get to see, but that's a topic for another lecture. Interior, please. Next slide, please. Unusual for the 15th century building, this is the inside of the building, that has been in almost constant use since. The interior retains both very fine plaster decoration and a band of original tile work in a series of intricate geometric patterns. Next slide, please. Some areas of this tile work had fortuitously been covered by a layer of plaster. So you can see the plaster this is me on my day job. This is the original tile work. This is plaster which had been painted in imitation, so it was very difficult sometimes to know what to remove. But some absolutely fabulous Timurid tile work came out of it. And you can see the bright glazes. Next slide, please. Elsewhere, areas of the original geometric decoration, this is original Timurid decoration, which hadn't seen the light of day for goodness knows how long, perhaps since the 15th century, were rediscovered and recorded along with the plaster work I showed you. Next slide, please. In such conservation work, documentation is paramount, and detailed drawings made during the work are included in a bilingual publication that provides a reference for future generations of Afghan scholars and professionals. I brought with me copies. I'm afraid I don't have multiple copies, but if anyone's interested, copies of the very modest publications that we've put together. We printed them either in Herat and Kabul, entirely put together by Afghan graphic designers, Afghan translators, photographers. It's a huge achievement, and it stands the test of time. And we make hundreds of copies and then send them to all the regional, all the universities, all the local libraries. And it's been a really, really rewarding experience. Sorry, I've lost my track here. Next slide, please. As in Bagabarbora, sustained community engagement was critical for the completion of the work in Herat, as was a willingness to listen to those who visited the site during the work, to understand its significance as a place of prayer, reflection, and interaction. I spent a lot of time scratching those tiles. You saw that slide. A lot of business gets done in these places. I mean, social business. It's very, very interesting to see how much more robust these spaces are, because one immediately goes in with an element of slight sort of sense of sanctity. There is a huge amount of sanctity, but it's very much respected, but it's also a very social space. These visitors were Taliban from Helmand. They showed up in 2016, who seemed intrigued by the work and stayed with us for hours. In fact, we couldn't get rid of them. They were absolutely intrigued by the tile work. Lovely, I mean, very, very engaged. But to add to my point about the understanding about culture, I was in the mausoleum only last week and the place was thronged with families. Families, yes. The project taught us how to learn on the job. As we stabilized, restored and cleaned the fragile tile work in a context where proper experts feared to tread at the time. I, as an architect, I'm not a conservation architect, even though I've done this work, luckily. I feel sometimes we're a bit prissy about conservation architecture and the science of conservation, because sometimes a lot of it's common sense. So while we respect international experts, we had very interestingly had a group of people who came from Turin, tile experts, sent in by UNESCO for another project, and they came to see us, and they was absolutely sort of absorbed by watching these young Afghans just cleaning and saying, God, we couldn't do that in Italy. I mean, this is just so clever. You're using Q-tips, you're using, cotton wool, you're very ingenious. And I said, look, any criticism? They said, please, just let us take a video and we'll just show what you can do on a shoestring. So sometimes, I mean, you do need expertise, but sometimes it's overplayed. Next slide, please. This is a slide I took last week. Because we have in our sights as important a Timurid mausoleum in Kursan, which is not a million miles from the epicenter, or very close to the epicenter of the recent earthquake, which has been damaged, and has exquisite, as you can see, internal plaster that my colleagues are currently documenting before it deteriorates further. And this is a case in point in terms of do what you can. We have a bunch of young female staff who work at home. I'm not comfortable with that. They come once a week to the office. And they do all the documentation of this kind of stuff. We take photographs, send them measurements, and they sit and work on laptops. It's absolutely extraordinary standard. And in time they'll be back in the office. But the fact is, you can still, if you're ingenious and subtle and quiet about it, you can still achieve a lot. Next, please. Another mausoleum. Sorry, I'm not fixated on mausoleums. I'll change in a minute. In a very different setting in Helmand, this was the focus of the conservation by a group of Afghans, very good friends of mine, who asked me in 2015 to visit and advise them. This is the Boss Citadel. This is the Helmand River. This is some probably Ghaznavid ruins. You can see the citadel in the background and the long sweep of the old city walls. Not bad for 14th, 15th century, and they're still standing. They've never been repaired. Next slide, please. The citadel's located on this, we think, a man-made mound. You can see the extraordinary construction ability between the provincial capital of Lashkargah and the ancient city of Bost, where there is archaeological evidence of occupation since 500 BC. This has never been excavated, so that's another dream, another life, another dream. Next, please. From the citadel at Bost, you can see the extent of what was the 10th century, the winter capital of the Ghaznavid dynasty, encircled by massive walls. Outer walls, this is sort of some inner structure, very difficult to know, huge scale. And all across that space are just little bumps and little depressions and little bumps and little rises, presumably very, very rich material, architecturally at least, and possibly otherwise as well. Next slide, please. Between 1949 and 51, French archaeologists excavated an area to the north. In this is one of the two large Ghaznavid palaces right on the banks, extraordinary, on the banks of the Helmand River, beside a huge bazaar that was a center of trade across the region at the time. So they found frescoes. There's quite a lot of material from this in the National Museum in Kabul, which is very, very rich and well worth seeing when you come and visit us. Next slide, please. The 12th century brick mausoleum of Shahzada Hussein, this is what I was going to see, this is a photograph taken in the 70s, lies to the east of these palaces, amidst fields of wheat and scattered graves. Next, please. It's known locally as Sarbaz, which means without a roof, in reference to the oculus at the top, which I'll show you in a second, at the apex of the dome, and around which runs a band of decorative brickwork. Next slide, please, with intricate masonry patterns also on the octagonal structure. Really, really rich brick decoration. Clearly, those who designed and constructed the building had both a sense of style and a very sound grasp of structural dynamics, because when you get to the top of that, you can just see the daylight through there. It's half a brick thick, so somebody had a really, really good structural understanding. Next, please. Given the turbulent history of the area, it's surprising that the mausoleum survives at all. And this is due in large part to the local community, whose role in safeguarding is rarely acknowledged on sites assumed like this to be abandoned and therefore at risk. During the course of the work here, however, it was evident the villagers who live nearby treasure the building, and some believe that it remains unfinished because one of its bricks flies to Mecca every year. That's why it's unfinished. Go figure. Local knowledge, eh? Next slide, please. Engagement with the elders was key to ensuring security for those working on site that lay not far from the front lines at the time. And it was under close surveillance from not only British drones, this was about 2 miles from the British so-called PRT, overhead, a provincial reconstruction base, fortified base, but also no doubt from insurgents' positions based just across the Helmand River to the west. We had constant contact with both sides. They were informed in advance, and fortunately the work was completed without incident, demonstrating how it's possible to operate in an insecure environment, not ideal, but possible, as long as the parties to the conflict understand the benefit of such an investment and trust those involved. I was working with a group of largely Helmandis, so I wasn't worried about my safety, but they were the protectors of the project. That said, I'm not really convinced by what we often hear about claims that cultural activity can itself contribute to fostering peace. That might sound surprising coming from somebody like me, but I do worry about this linear progression that people are going to get together, read poetry, play music, and therefore they're all going to be peaceful and live happily ever after. It isn't as simple as that. So we need to be very careful as cultural practitioners that we break it down into something that is more, to my mind, believable. But our experience in Helmand demonstrates that such work has the potential to ease the psychological and economic impact on civilians living in the midst of the conflict. I haven't been back there, but I'm sure that it's being used, apparently very, very popular for family picnics, even in Helmand. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to take you on a quick diversion far to the west, so forgive me, to Nimruz province. I don't know how many people would have recognized it, but on the frontier with Iran, where the landscape is dotted with remains of imposing homesteads such as this, built by communities who relied on the Helmand River for irrigation of their fields until it changed course. I'm not quite sure when it changed course. I should probably know, but eons ago. And the place is littered with these huge, huge, huge fortresses, which are really quite eerie, surrounded by pottery, very, very fine pottery shards. I was fortunate to spend several months in the area during the early 90s while working for the UN on a humanitarian gig, but it didn't stop me getting on a horse and going and visiting these places. We couldn't go anywhere by car because there was a flood, which was very fortuitous. And I've ever since longed to return and see what might be done to document and safeguard these amazing structures. Watch this space. Next slide, please. I'm now taking you back in time to a pair of Buddhist stupas dating from between the 3rd and 5th centuries AD. Llewellyn Morgan, who some of you will no doubt know, who wrote an excellent book on the Bamiyan Buddhas, describes the stupa as, I quote, an engine for salvation, a spiritual lighthouse that brought enlightenment to devotees. And these, what I'm going to show you, certainly live up to this characterization. Can you see the stupa? Up the valley. Some of you will recognize it as Topdara in Parwan. Next slide, please. The form of stupas in the region is largely determined. I'll explain this sort of more technical slide in a sec. The form of stupas in the region is largely determined by ritual, with a square raised platform on which stand a cylindrical drum supporting a dome, in which is a reliquary with either nail clippings or the hair of the Buddha or something or other, or a bit of bone or whatever, rather like, not unlike Christian reliquaries at Lourdes and places like that. This is what stupas look like. We've worked on the top 2 of these. This is the 2 I'm going to show you. The biggest one left in Afghanistan, Topdara standing. This is the smaller one, which is in a bad shape, which we would hope to work on, funds allowing. But what's interesting is just how similar they are. There are dozens of stupas around Kabul and elsewhere, all the way down to Nangarhar, that they all follow this pattern. And I found it intriguing that was there a copybook? Obviously, Masons spoke to Masons. They looked at each other's work, but there's an extraordinary continuity. The only adjustment is depending on what stone is available locally. Next slide, please, if the battery's okay. This is Topdara. This is the first one I'll deal with. They're in prominent positions. This is the stupa. This is the autumn shot of the same stupa you saw in the first slide when it was way up the valley. They were close to what were important pilgrimage and trade routes, presumably to enhance visibility. They were always situated on high ground, always facing a trade route. And it always got me thinking about petrol stations, because now if you travel from Kabul to Mazar, seems like every 500 meters is a petrol station to attract people. Was it as competitive at the time? We think of Buddhists as all being this sort of this serene bodies, but they may have been fiercely competitive, and they were certainly very business-minded. So this is where we started, all divided up with agricultural fields. Everyone had a stake. My gandum, your gandum, my whatever. So we had to negotiate just to get access to the site, because obviously the farmers had moved in and sort of pushed in as far as they could, because they could use the land, it's productive land, over the centuries. Whether the monastic orders of which these were part competed for business is hard to know, but Buddhist monks were by all accounts significant players in the economy at the time. At Sheweki we found traces of furnaces for smelting copper, while the monks, the next slide please, at this site, which is Mesainak, some of you will be aware of it, it's a very, very large copper deposit underground, which the Buddhists for centuries exploited with long shafts that went down from this ridge. It's said that one of the biggest copper deposits on the globe is under this ridge, which the Chinese are now in the process of talking about. They haven't done anything yet, but talking about mining. Watch this space again. Next slide, please. This is Toptra when we started work, when we surveyed in 2016. As you can see, it was beginning to crumble, so it was quite important to get a handle on. This was eroding quite quickly every winter. No damage from the conflict, surprisingly, despite people assuming that all damage is conflict related sometimes. But it made it very urgent that we started work. Next slide, please. Only a small section of the structure stood above ground, with a mound on which this is the mound, on which we erected scaffolding to investigate and stabilize the upper parts. Not being able to use mechanical equipment on what was effectively an archaeological area, techniques we used that in all likelihood resembled those employed by the builders of the stupas 17 centuries, remember, ago. So basically we had to leave everything here intact to begin with, work from the top down, and only then could we excavate below, because otherwise we would have damaged the subground. Next slide, please. In all, some 400 tons of stone were lifted on that scaffolding to reconstruct the dome, and the dome is 30 meters above the ground level. This is after the work, when some of that work had been restored. Just goes to show the sort of the quality of craftsmanship that is in these villages, and people understand, given the time, given the tools, given the patience, and some money, what can be achieved. Next slide, please. Once the upper sections were stable, scaffolding was removed and the excavation of the surrounding mound began. This revealed remains of a large stone masonry platform, which is beginning to emerge here. Staircase. It was actually transfixing to dig down and think, are we going to find anything? Are we going to look really stupid? And then suddenly these little sections of absolutely exquisite stonework, totally untouched, were revealed. Next slide, please. So that's before. This is later. So now you can see the whole platform and the staircase. Absolutely massive piece of construction. This revealed remains of a large stone platform with many of the original details that formed the basis for the subsequent reconstruction. Eventually, the entire platform was reconstructed, along with an impressive stair that leads up from the east, that's this one, from where worshippers would have approached up a series of terraces. This was controversial because some people say, I think if we'd done this in France or even possibly in Iran or somewhere in the region, they would have said, no, you shouldn't reconstruct what you don't find. But in the circumstances, we decided in consultation with our Afghan counterparts and lots of other people that it was worthwhile this was here anyway, up to this level, it was worthwhile if you distinguish what the new work is, it's worthwhile putting it back because it'll stand the test of time. And also you get a sense of what the original was like. But we've got some brickbats for this, and fine, it doesn't worry me too much, but we did have to justify it. Next slide, please. We only built what we found. So if, for example, this detail hadn't been present, we wouldn't have been able to reconstruct it. You have to be very, very rigorous about that. So if you find one capital of one column, one particular piece, you can replicate that. But if you don't find the original, there's nothing there. You have to leave it blank. That's a very, very strict conservation practice. So this is one of our most experienced masons reconstructing one of the niches. Again, look at that handiwork. Next slide, please. Although our primary focus was on conserving the architecture, a team of Afghan archaeologists excavated in parallel with the architects and ensured that sensitive areas were not disturbed. This is one of the objects that emerged from their excavations, which also included exquisite gold and pearl ornaments. There were some fabulous kind of jewelry pieces, suggesting that the monks were both wealthy and rather chic. I mean, they must have been quite a number looking at some of the gold and pearls. Next slide, please. Traces of stucco sculpture were found in what seemed to be chapels on the west side of the stupa. So this would have been the base of a figurative sculpture, which is long lost. Sometimes you can see the toes there. You just get the toes and the feet and nothing else left. But for this to have survived is just extraordinary. We left there's some more toes. We left most of this alone because we didn't have the resources to excavate. It would have taken years. So we just put a big roof over it. And hopefully we can follow up in the future, or somebody can follow up in the future. Next slide, please. This is the other stupa at Shewaki as we found it in 2016. Smaller, but sort of very, very similar in shape and details. This is when we started surveying. You can get an idea of the scale here. That's my boss, my Afghan boss standing there to provide scale. While it follows the same basic form as Topdera, the setting is very different, for it stands on foothills across which are remains of about 30 or 40 other structures from the Buddhist era, stupas, towers, monasteries, and things we can't recognize. This suggests a sizable population, although no trace has yet been found of a settlement. I mean, it's extraordinary. Just one stretch of hillside has got 40 major monuments. There must have been a city somewhere there, but nobody's found it. For future Afghan archaeologists to find. Next, please. The conservation work followed a similar sequence to that at Topdera. But here we found areas of the original lime plaster. You can see that. Again, extraordinary that the plaster had survived perhaps, 15 or 17 centuries. We conserved the intricate, next slide, please. We conserved intricate architectural details. Here's another mason doing another gig on another drum. By now, our masons were very, very experienced. Although visually pleasing to the modern eye, this masonry was originally plastered and painted in gaudy colours. Traces of red pigment were found on some of our other sites closer to Kabul. It's odd that they went to this extraordinary level of detail, which looks sort of so enticing and so attractive to the modern eye, but it would have all been covered with plaster. Next slide, please. What is more, there would have been flags and umbrella-like chhatri on the top. I mean, the top of the dome would have both been painted and would have these big chhatri and huge, great banners, which from textual accounts suggest were very sort of gaudy and colourful. Again, part of the attraction. Roll up, pray here, kind of thing. Next slide, please. Excavation around the stupa at Shewaki revealed a huge platform on which stood secondary stupas. So here's the kind of perimeter. We knew nothing about this when we started. All we could see was that little bit at the top. And these are all the sub-stupas, the little baby stupas. So the project went, grew in scale enormously. As on some other sites, the platform has battlements that suggest a defensive purpose at a time when monastic centres seem to have been centres of economic and political power. It's a real conundrum, because scholars who read the text say that some of these orders got on quite well with each other. But when you look at the sites, you realise they obviously didn't, because they needed to really defend themselves. I mean, nobody would build that just to impress people. It is very impressive. But there's obviously a whole sub-story there that still needs to be uncovered, at least in my view. Next slide, please. I've missed a slide. I had a nice slide of the labour force. The bulk of, I think we had, on any one day, we had about 120 people on site. And out of those, probably 110 were from the villages. So there's a huge buy-in from the local community. Even, as I shall discuss a little bit later, even though they're not Buddhists, they don't understand how Buddhists prayed. The caricature is that some Afghans don't like Buddhism. They want it all destroyed because we're now Muslims. So much more subtle, so much more complicated than that. And I'll describe a little bit of the. Okay, next slide, please. So this gives an idea of the scale. This is just as we were kind of finishing off the work. Next, please. This is a secondary stupa we found elsewhere. Again, unexpected, beautiful little sort of sub-stupa, which I think what happened is that rather like in Christian sites and possibly Jewish sites as well, people came and made donations of sort of sub-shrines that would be remembered and probably in the name of their families. This has been restored. Next slide, please. Okay, there they are. That's our workforce. That's why I didn't want to miss it. Yeah, that's all the lads. I think the head of the project is sitting there modestly. I didn't take the photographs that one of my colleagues did, but yeah, this is all the guys. And we learned so much from each other, so much from each other. Largely Pashtun community, pretty shit poor. I mean, not wealthy at all. But they became firm friends. Next slide, please. While Buddhist sites such as Toptra and Shawaki may no longer hold spiritual significance for Afghans, the restored stupas continue to attract members of the public. This was taken a few months ago when we had some visitors from the authorities, most of whom understand the intrinsic value of such monuments and value them as part of their heritage. Well, this was a very interesting site visit because this is a Deputy Minister of Culture in late 2021. He couldn't get enough of are there texts that we should read? Can you help us to translate material about Buddhism into Pashtun? Is there anything you can help us with? Can you make copies of this? And they've taken a huge number of our publications. I don't feel entitled not to take that at face value as a foreigner, and I just feel that somebody's engaging so much more modest than his predecessors, I'm sorry to say, who would have come with armed guards and video cameras and taken selfie after selfie after selfie. These guys, just walked and walked and walked. I mean, call me a relativist, but we have to, as a foreigner, as an outsider, as a non-Muslim, I feel that we have to somehow accept the fact that this belongs to everybody, and we should be open about everybody's access to it and everybody's understanding of it. Because Deputy Minister Azizi now, every time I see him, he said, have you got more money for Buddhist sites? We want to do more. Come to Nangarhar, come to Jalalabad. We've got a whole load of stupas we want to work on. What am I to say? Yeah. I don't want to labour that point, but it is important to remember it isn't an us and them, bad and good, good Buddhist, bad Muslim, or whatever the hell people want to caricature. It's much, much more, and you just need to spend time. I mean, I'm lucky to have that time to do that. The next slide, please. This is the enthusiastic welcome committee who greets visitors. These are from the village. We've had a whole load of bloggers come to this site, and they post these wonderful photographs of these kids. And so we always joke with the kids that they're the best advertisement for both Buddhism and Shewakia. They're so much fun. They're very curious. Anyway, that's a little bit of a light-hearted slide. Next, please. On a more serious note, it's often the villagers like this man who over generations tried to safeguard monuments in their midst, even in times of conflict. In a context where officials and outside experts tend to portray the remote historic sites as under real or perceived, in brackets, threat, particularly in the case of Buddhist heritage, local communities are much more engaged as custodians than many outsiders realize, which needs to be borne in mind in portrayals of the endangered heritage that I mentioned at the start. This is actually one of our village kind of contacts from Topdara. Next slide, please. So just in case you haven't had enough stupas, here's another one. Some of you will recognize this. This is Takht Rustam. Very unusual. It's not unusual in Southeast Asia to have rock-cut stupas, but it's cut out of the mountainside in Samangan. And we've done a conservation assessment of it. We'd love to do a kind of conservation plan and do some work on it. It doesn't need the same kind of work as you've just seen because it is what it is. But it is quite vulnerable. There's quite a lot of graffiti on it at times. But very, very popular site, again, as a picnic site, as much as anything. But a huge richness of Buddhist heritage all the way up to Balkh and beyond. It doesn't go much further west than that. Next slide, please. Finally, a brief glimpse of our ongoing work. This is the work I'm still involved in. This is a synagogue in the old city of Herat, the UR synagogue. Next slide, please. We are in the process of, that was a kind of before and after sequence. This has all been rebuilt. Some of it was rebuilt earlier, but it's deteriorated quite a lot. absolutely fabulous paintwork and plasterwork. And our plan is to turn it into a library, hopefully, with, we need to negotiate that. But I put it forward, showed it to you as an example of what can be done to adaptively reuse historic buildings that are redundant. It was unfortunately damaged during the recent earth tremors in November when I was there, and we're working on repairs. So at the moment, the entire inside of the synagogue is on props with great bulks of timber to try and stop it collapsing. Next slide, please. Nearby, there's a traditional bathhouse that we're working on. This is taken 2 weeks ago. That was also, we think, reserved for the Jewish community. Anecdotally, they say, but it'll be rendered to be an operational bathhouse yet again. This has been intriguing because the technology that goes with traditional bathhouses, we visited lots of bathhouses, particularly in Kabul and elsewhere in Herat, to try and come with an environmentally more sensible approach has been quite intriguing. A good Afghan friend of mine from Kabul visited a couple of weeks ago, and he said, "Jolyon, you're wasting your time. This would make the most sublime restaurant." I wish. Yeah. Some of you will recognize the next slide, which is a bit of a symbol. It's also a bit of a bugbear of mine because you've seen what is possible, what's to be done, and the minaret of Jam is still standing there and hardly anything has taken place. Millions has been spent on visiting it, photographing it, drones and helicopter visits and this. And I'm sorry to say it's a scandal, that it isn't as vulnerable as people want to make out. It's been there for, since Ghiyasuddin put it up in 14th century. So it's not going anywhere fast, but it just seems to be almost a totem, almost a fetish of endangered heritage that we do nothing about because it's better to leave it endangered. I mean, call me cynical, but we've tried really, really hard to both get funding or get UNESCO to agree that we can support them to work on it, but it's still very lonely out there, and it's showing wear and tear. The reason I showed this also is because those of you who are familiar with the country know how inaccessible places like Jam are. I was there in 2015, 2016, and it was a real struggle we went and camped there for a week or 10 days on the site to see what we could do with a bunch of Afghan friends. And it got very difficult for security reasons, but also logistical reasons to get there. Now, it's a breeze. I mean, you just drive from Chakcharan or drive from Herat. It's much, much more secure. Even with external funding now largely restricted to humanitarian initiatives, a case can be made for the employment that conservation generates, and this would generate a huge amount, especially among marginal rural communities. The villagers here are very, very poor, and they're totally mystified because foreigners and people with guns, who they don't know whether they're foreigners or not because they've got helmets and goggles and bits of wire coming out the back of their head, who show up as bodyguards, keep on meeting them and saying, "Is this safe? Shall we do this? Shall we do that?" And they're totally flummoxed by this. And why don't you just come here and do some work? Come and stay. And spending a week with them, it was very, very poignant to hear the potential, the will to contribute to this. What they feel is their minaret. Who's to doubt that? So employment is an important issue. As important to my mind is the potential investments to enhance skills, you saw the Masons, and to reassure remote communities that they're not forgotten, as I said at the beginning. Last slide, please. All it takes is a degree of commitment, financial resources, and technical support to ensure that future generations, such as these young lads, and in Herat, and notice their rabbit, please, are able to appreciate the richness of their cultural heritage. Thanks. So.
I heard several wows from this presentation. Jolyon has kindly said that he'll answer questions, so who would like to ask? Yes.
Why Afghanistan?
Why not?
What was the trigger when the journey started? You said about 10 years ago.
30 years ago.
30 years ago, yeah. So,
I started working on this stuff about 15 years ago. Yeah. I got a phone call from the UN one day and they said, "Do you want to go and help Afghan refugees?" And it ended up being in Peshawar, and I couldn't get on with Peshawar. I found it. I'd been working previous 5-6 years in Yemen, in rural communities in Yemen with Oxfam, and I found Peshawar weird and false and posy and all the rest of it, with all respect to dear friends I know from Peshawar days. So I went to Kabul, and I've not been pretty much stuck there ever since. No, to be serious about it, wonderful people to work with, very demanding, very much sort of in need of technical support, moral support. In my case, my only role, a little bit of technical support in these projects, but my main role is fundraising and writing English reports. None of my colleagues speak fluent English or can write fluent English, and that isn't by design. So I just sort of fill a slot, and my boss is an Afghan, and we just get on with it, and it's enormously rewarding. Obviously we all know the challenges. Those of you who've lived there know the challenges, but isolation sometimes, cultural differences and so on. But social life is great. Afghan social life is great. Walks are great. The mountains are beautiful. The fruit is wonderful. What more can I say?
I'm not been there for the last 7 years.
Come and visit.
Hi. Thank you very much. That was wonderful, and I missed some of it. But just one question that I had was, do you have a pre-3D sort of images of those that normally you can actually you can actually put the 3D image or make the 3D image while you're doing it? Because some of these sort of excavation that I've seen, you could actually you can see what was there before. What do you think?
It would be ideal, but it's very costly. So the French archaeologists do quite a lot of 3D work. There's a group of Afghans who work for Mobi, the Tolo company. Very, very skilled Afghans who are working with a bunch of people at UCLA in the computer science department using drones. And they've done a fabulous 3D rendition of Shewaki. You can just move around and all the rest of it. I didn't.
That's what I thought.
But it's the only one site. We can't. We're a tiny little 12, 15 person band, and we just go from project to project. So if we had the capital to be able to invest in that kind of stuff, mainly computer kit, basically. We've got drones, but we don't use them that much. Some of these photographs were taken with drones. And obviously until 2021, we weren't allowed to use drones because of military sensitivities. Ironically, the present administration is much cooler about it, but they're okay. But no, point well taken. It's a huge help, I think, particularly for archaeologists. But as an architect, I worry a little bit by some of the sort of high-tech stuff, because it takes a lot of the capital out of the jobs that need to be made on site. So, for example, the Jam minaret I showed you is probably one of the most, I think, in my view, prejudiced view, one of the most over-documented. We've had drones and drones and drones and videos and this and 3D scans, and there's beautiful books being published about it. It doesn't really help us until we get up on the scaffolding and get up close to those tiles and work out what's going wrong. You can have the most wonderful renditions. There was a big show at the Musée Guimet in Paris a couple of months ago, which showed beautiful, beautiful images of jam, which were very seductive, but it doesn't say anything about the conservation. So I'm not tilting at it, but I'm a kind of practical person who, as you saw, likes to sort of scrub tiles. It's rather sad, but tiles clean and things like that.
Thank you very much.
Well, partly I'm speechless with this fantastic display of the work that you've been doing and what you have uncovered. Really is remarkable. So I'm speechless to that way. But talking about the support that you get from the authorities, tacit or otherwise these days, how do we understand the destruction of the Buddhas of Bamiyan so many years ago? Clearly the kinds of people who were motivated to do that were not the people who are in charge today.
I don't see signs of that. But by the same token, do we, as Brits, hang our heads in shame because of what we did in Herat in the 19th century? Lest we forget, the Mursala complex. So I'm not defending the unforgivable destruction of the Bamiyan Buddhas, but again, I wonder whether it doesn't become a fetish of Afghan culture. Not that we should move on. We need to remember huge amounts of money has been spent on, trying to put Humpty Dumpty back together again, not with huge impact, but at least it's stable now. Nobody can condone what happened. But there's a point that the Bamiyan Buddhas are not Afghan cultural heritage alone. They're symbolic. And I've been to 4 or 5 exhibitions of the Bactrian gold in San Francisco, in Tokyo, here and there, when it's gone around the world. At the entrance to the exhibition, they have the Al Jazeera footage of the Bamiyan Buddhas. It's kind of, guys, come on, get over it. I mean, this is nothing to do with this exhibition, but we somehow have to show that we're zakhmi, that we're wounded, that I shouldn't be forgotten. Huge amounts have been written about it. If you want something about the politics, read Barry Flood's article on it. Absolutely brilliant, professor at NYU. And he tries to unpick some of the politics. It was an entirely political act. It was a symbolic act. I was in Kabul at the time. They were totally pissed off with us because we were strutting our humanitarian stuff, telling them what to do, and obviously somebody had a bad day, and it wasn't necessarily the people I was dealing with. It was much, you can say darker forces or much more radical forces, and unforgivable damage was done. But let's not judge the entire movement, by that act, which Zabiullah Mujahid, when I first went back to Kabul in 2021, gave an event to reopen the National Museum. I was the only foreigner in the room, so he didn't need to impress me. It was a room full of turbans and beards, and all in Pashtun. And he basically stood up and said, we should be ashamed of what happened to the Bamiyan Buddhas. We have changed. We need to understand. It's darkened the reputation of our country. And we should never forget the fact that this was done. Whereas, some of my dearest friends in the Republic, the previous, with all respect, amongst the Afghans here, but, some of them, basically the Bamiyan Buddhas was a nice little earner. Every time, all you do, let's have more money, let's have more money. Were they really interested? I'm not saying there were not very valuable things done and have been done, but it was a very, very unfortunate incident, and it's indefensible. But it's not my view of Afghan culture. We stay clear of Bamiyan because it's a little bit expert heavy as well, because we don't sort of fit into that landscape. But no, point well taken.
Well, thank you very much. It illuminates the situation.
It's a tricky thing to say because if one talks about sort of cultural fetishes, it's almost as if one's trying to play it down. Not at all. But other dreadful things have been done, in the name of profit. And damage has been done to all sorts of sites in the country by the US military that is now beginning to come to light, which not as egregious, but over time will be discovered and probably, hopefully, go down in history as a reckoning.
Yes. Can I ask about the impact of the earthquake in the Herat Valley? You showed us the wonderful synagogue and told us that that's all propped up now. I'm just thinking of shrines and so on, Zendajan and Ziyarat Jah, places like that. Was there a lot of damage?
Ziyarat Jah is okay. We've done, together with the Aga Khan Trust, we've done systematic surveys of all the sites around the epicenter. Since we were there in the earthquake. So the first thing we did, we had a knock the morning after on our door with the head of a representative of the Ministry of Culture said, what can you do about the monuments? Quite impressive. No hanging around. So we said, look, we don't have many resources. We've got labor. So we put 70 men on 2 trucks and sent them straight to Zindajan to help pull people out of the rubble for 2 or 3 days. And they spent most of their time actually digging graves, tragically. But it was very good. Everybody was really, really keen. And the amount of money that was raised from the public in Herat for Zindajan was really impressive. Rollover aid agencies. Very, very impressive. But it's sad. Thousands of people lost their lives. We're all trying now to raise funds to do some repairs. But some of the stuff is probably irreparable. For example, in the Zindajan mausoleum itself. But the one I showed you, it's called Tumanara in Khorasan, is not very badly damaged, thankfully. But in downtown Herat, The mausolea I showed you have some cracks. One of the minarets has a crack, but none of it's, I mean, it's been through. They've probably been through worse over time. Because lest we forget, in the Khartid time, I think Charlie will correct me if I'm wrong. Herat, the old city of Herat, was totally laid waste by an earthquake, a massive earthquake, destroyed the Great Mosque, destroyed everything. But the memory isn't there. I was, having lived in Yemen and Turkey, used to earthquakes. I was quite surprised how jumpy and frightened the Heratis were, the tremors after the earthquake. But it's just a matter of memory and consciousness, I think. But a lot of people sleeping on the streets when I left, still at night, because they're worried about the aftershocks. Intense. It's bloody cold right now. Sorry.
Hi, Jolyon.
Hi.
Just a couple of things I've read for coming that Afghanistan has been rated in 2024 as one of the most peaceful countries in the region. I'm not sure if that's to do with recently tour guides and people going in and around the country. Just from your perspective, have you seen people, tourists going there? Do you feel on the ground that you are safe, and the perspective is that you can sort of travel all over the country? And thirdly, do you think that if there is sort of advantage for the de facto government to help support you in your work, because if more tourists will come, and they're always looking for different opportunities, have you ever approached them for funding?
I mean, the authorities contribute. They contribute manpower to us, particularly technical staff. I mean, I'm a bit of an outlier when it comes to this because, I've lived through sort of 2.5 wars in Kabul. So, yes, it's very peaceful, but it's all relative. You have the right paperwork, speak a little bit of the language. It's a doddle. I mean, I can drive to Kandahar, up to Herat on the ring road. And the check posts are very professional, as long as you have all your paperwork right. And much less fleecing going on of trucks, and our supplies are no longer fleeced by check posts. So generally, I mean, I wouldn't want to sort of play it up too much. I notice in Kabul, you get these big pickups with emblazoned tour guide tour trips, kind of wild trips. And as I said before, you have these bloggers who are traveling around. As far as I understand, I mean, a friend of mine lives in Helmand. He sent me photographs recently of a whole bunch of New Zealanders, Australians, South Africans, and even Americans going around Lashkargah, with backpacks. Intrepid, but just get your papers right. I mean, I've got a sheaf of papers from local authorities, intelligence, Ministry of Culture, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I've never had to show them. So, but I mean, language helps. I mean, obviously, they're more suspicious if you can't explain what you're doing there, even with my very poor Pashto.
I was just going to ask about the minaret in Jam. I was intrigued that in an earthquake area, you were talking about the earthquakes, that it's still standing after all this time. And I just wondered if it's anything to do with the height, because in some earthquake areas, when you build buildings, if they're at a certain height, they don't fall down. If they're taller, they do, or if they're smaller, they do. It's all to do with harmonics or something. Somebody explained to me once, but I just wondered if you knew anything about how it happens.
I think it's a bunch of jolly clever Gorids.
Sorry?
I think it's a bunch of jolly clever Gorid builders. It's bloody well built.
Yeah.
And it's right on the edge of 2 rivers, which flood every year. So it's always on. It's extraordinary. No, I think I just sort of, when I look at it, I don't think of the risks. I just think of, God, these guys knew what they were doing. And we haven't even, we're not allowed to, because UNESCO is very sort of protective of territorial about it. And it's a World Heritage Site, so we shouldn't. We don't even know what the foundations are like. I mean, there have been some studies, but no, it's just jolly well built. And it's on bedrock. Bedrock, so it's not on silt or anything like that. They knew what they were doing.
More questions? Comments? Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about the time scale? You've said that you and your band go from one project to another. So we'll go back to the beginning of the presentation. You talked about the garden and the transformation you made there, which is enormous and spectacular. How long did that take you? And you talk us through some of the challenges on the way that made it take longer.
It was 2002, I think. when I first sort of started to kind of get involved and set up the Afghan Trust for Culture, and we handed it over in 2008. So it was a good 6 years, 6+ years. Slow to start because we didn't have much funding. Politically very, very tricky because working for the Afghan, the sense was that the Ismailis are taking over public space. Understandable, bad communication perhaps on our part or the Ismaili leadership's part. And some of the biggest constraints we faced were from, when they weren't technical, but they were from really, really stubborn Afghan bureaucrats who were very protective in the municipality, Ministry of Urban Development, and in Karzai's team, President Karzai's team at the time. So a lot of the time was spent on politics to begin with, to get far enough to show results that they can then go wah 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 and put it on their websites or whatever. But incredibly rewarding. But for me, I think, to be honest, the most satisfying part of it was the planting. Was just Engineer Latif I mentioned on his motorbike coming back saying, I've got 4 dozen pears, and then the next spring you'd see them. And I think it's planted in me a passion for gardening ever since. But it was very interesting because we had to change all the levels. So that was about 6 years. The stupas together were 2016 to 2022. So that's another 6 years. And our present project has been about 2 years. So yeah, you have to kind of think of the longue durée, you can't do things quickly. I mean, for political reasons, it's a little bit easier because they're much more supportive. There are very few of us as organizations working in culture. I mean, it's UNESCO's Afghan Trust, there's ourselves, and a couple of other small, we're a small Afghan NGO, but there are a couple of others. But so there isn't a lot of, we've got a lot of time with our counterparts to explain things, and a lot of curiosity. They're not beleaguered by foreign visitors anymore, for better or for worse. I think they miss that. But it still seems to be a bit of an allergy for Her Majesty's government or the French or somebody to come and show up. And they'll come quietly, but it's usually on other issues to do with migration and drugs, and it's not about culture. So yeah, you have to. It does take time, and sometimes when I meet people who sort of say, well, I've got this wonderful idea and we're going to implement it, kind of tomorrow, like many aid projects through the last 20 years, one has to just mind one's counsel and not say, just put a lot of contingency in there because things take time in this place. Partly because of obduracy, but also it's difficult to find the skills, but they're there. You just need time to talk to people and wait. And, as I said, people come out of the woodwork, both professionals and craftspeople, men and women.
Again, thank you so much for this. Been really enjoyable watching and listening to you. You said the skills come as the woodworks, and it's extraordinary what they've done. And you're right that there is talent if people are given the opportunity. But how would you motivate them more? What kind of skills would be needed? What's needed? What's there currently?
I mean, most of the communities we work in rural areas are agricultural. If they're lucky, they can get day labour in Kabul if they're close enough, or Herat or wherever. It really depends on what's marketable. I mean, there's not much point in training a whole load of villagers to be actually arch stonemasons where they've got bugger all to do the moment you back up, But what we do, it isn't black and white. I mean, so each of the boshi, the foreman that you saw there, as a matter of course, in all our projects, we assign 2 village, not interns, we pay them proper salary, proper wage, apprentices, give them tools, and they have to actually never leave the shadow of this man. And they're always men, obviously masons in rural areas. What they learn sometimes is fabulous. And some of the young masons came from one stupa to the other, which is coming from Parwan all the way down to the border of Logar, which was quite a shift for them, Dari-speaking area, Pashtun-speaking area, very different dynamic politically and whatever. But we wanted to keep continuity of work. But I can't lie about the fact that, if donor funding dries up, we have to let people go. There is an argument, and Turquoise Mountain is an example, that, an argument to do skills that are marketable. But then, what is marketable? for ordinary Afghans in Kabul these days. It's all very nice to have beautiful timber screens that you give to ambassadors and you adorn in. I mean, it's great if it's creating employment for people, but it really isn't sustainable in the longer term. I'm not criticizing it, but that's a very different end of the kind of craft cultural market. We're at the much more, the coalface end of it. So yes, it's important, and sometimes it's not even craft skills; it's just drawing. We've got a couple of young staff who just came from villages and are really, really, really good draftsmen. I always joke with our archaeologist friends, Afghan archaeologists we work with, who are underpaid and underskilled and under-resourced, but very, very, and you'll see from one of the documents I brought here to show as an example, very, very good inventory they've done. The workers are the best archaeologists this side of goodness knows where, of Athens. They're so eagle-eyed for coins. That piece of marble I showed you, that carved piece of schist, was found by a labourer. They'll look at me and they'll joke with me sometimes, say, engineer, so come here, and they'll say, what can you see here? Can we clear it out? And I go, yes, clear it out. And they say, ha, got you. You didn't see that coin. You didn't see that mich. You didn't see that turta or something, Very, very, very good. And it's just practice and practice and practice and investing in them, So we always laud the villagers as being both archaeologists, advisors, intermediaries, and they're not a subclass. It's their building, it's their space, it's their environment. Particularly in Tobdra and Cherokee, where the landscape is so important.
And is there a team already established?
I mean, my colleagues, my boss. We go all over the place. Somebody asks us to go and look at a site in Rohr or Badris or somewhere like that. We'll jump in a truck and go.
And do you need more people to do that?
Well, we need money to be able to pay for it. I mean, that's not your business. But no, I mean, to sustain, if you're trying to stitch together projects end to end to keep people employed, to have the continuity of employment, that the experience develops and develops. Because if you let people go and then try and rehire them, number one, they're resentful. Number two, they're probably picked up by a construction company. And that's not the way we want to work. We want to try and build an institution without being very grand about it, but build some continuity. And that's where I come in, because I'm the Muggins who does all the funding proposals. Not always very successfully, I should say.
Jolyon, I have a question.
Yes.
Do you get feedback from the families of the guys who work with you? Do you hear what they say when they go back home? And do you get feedback from the families how they appreciate it?
Depends a little bit where you are. In Toptara, we had much more families coming to visit us, which is in Parwan. In Cherokee, it was much more, apart from the little welcome committee I showed you, who were one of many. Women don't go out of the compound very much, and they certainly wouldn't come to a site where there are 150 men who they know or know them. So we do, I understand, I mean, I haven't seen them myself. I've seen them in Toptara, but not in Cherokee. Apparently there are lots of family picnics going on because it's remote enough that nobody will notice. And a lot of Afghan family groups are traveling around. And when I fly back to Kabul from Dubai, it's very interesting engaging with Afghans on the flight. And I sort of say tentatively, kind of, why are you going back? They usually say, why the hell are you going back? And usually it's for a wedding or something. And they say, we're going to have a ball of a time because we're going to see the cousins and we can go to the village and we can let our hair down and it's all so much safe now. And you kind of take a little bit of a breath and think, and this is women talking, I mean, who will talk to me in the airport. And there is another side to life. Okay, that's middle to upper class life, people who can afford to travel like that. But through custom, we don't have a huge amount of contact with rural women, although our female staff in Herat do, and they give us feedback. And they're very well networked. Everybody knows everybody, but we just don't talk about it. Because somebody said to me recently they wanted to do a sort of a friend from the BBC, they wanted to do something on Afghan culture and how life goes on, and I could just see where the plot was developing. As I said, excuse us if we sound secretive, but the last thing I want to do is blow the cover of my dear Afghan female colleagues, because they'll get into terrible trouble. At the moment it's don't ask, don't tell. And hopefully that will, as I said in the talk, I mean, correct me if you think I'm wrong, but my key friends obviously in Kabul are well-educated, upper middle class, highly committed Afghans in business, in academia and whatever. what we call civil society, etc. And to a man and a woman, they're all totally committed to make things work. When we get together for dinners or whatever, picnics or whatever, there's no whinging about, oh, life's a bitch, isn't it terrible, isn't it terrible? There are dark jokes about some mad mullah or some mad check post, but it's very, very much ridicule. And I think many of the Talibs realize what they've got on their hands in terms of pushback from ordinary Afghan families. And that's what gives, as I said in different words, but that's what gives me hope, is the fact that they've got to contend with some very opinionated, very determined, extremely gifted citizens of their country who are not going to let go. And we often, perhaps I'm exaggerating here because I haven't been in this country for a while, but it's often portrayed in the international media anyway as if, everyone is a victim. These men and women are not victims. They're ready for, they're quietly getting on with things, making things work so they can be in a stronger position to make something else work, rather than picking fights. And it's very impressive, very, very impressive, and much, much different from in the 90s when I was in charge of the UN in Kabul. It was very different then because people were very pushed down. They felt very repressed. It was very difficult to find that energy. But 20 years has gone by and people are much better educated, they're much wealthier. They've got different worldviews and they've got the internet and various other things. So I think there's a huge cause for hope.
Jolyon, just on this very positive note that we've got to now, please tell us about this wonderful picture that we're looking at on the wall.
I have the most wonderful...
Is this your photo?
No, I wish. Farhad Sarosh is studying in Iran on a part-time basis because he can't get the training he wants in Afghanistan. He's part of our Herat team. He's a wonderful photographer, and he's learned all his photography from the internet. And me bringing cameras from here and encouraging him. He's got a very good eye. And I was preparing this a couple of weeks ago, and he was just about to head off to Meshhad, and he said, "I got a photograph you might want to use." And it took me a while to realize the rabbit. This is just outside the walls of the hammam we're working on, the bathhouse. And he always takes really, really good community photographs. He gets people at ease. I don't know how he does it, but he's very, very gifted. Again, totally self-taught. Farhad Sarosh, yeah. He's 12th grader. That's why I'm sending him to Iran to get a master's degree, or a bachelor's degree, so he can sort of get up the ladder. But totally committed, very, very gifted. Just need time and encouragement and friendship.
But do we know who this little boy is?
No, I don't. Actually, I should have asked. No, Herat as well, better than I do. The kuches of Herat, now I'm working there again, are full of kids who come up, Mister, they think I'm a tourist or something. It's hilarious. They're so pushy, girls and boys. And because it's so much more protected in the narrow alleyways, and that's where we're working. I don't know who they are, but I rather fancied the rabbit. It's rather sweet. So I thought it would be a nice note to...
Prize-winning photo.
Who's proud of it?
Yeah. No, the UN has used quite a few of his photographs for their PR, and I think it's great. It's good for him, to get the coverage. Anyway, thank you all for your patience and your presence.